Good evening. I'm Diana Skaya, and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has informed European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that Poland will not implement the EU's migration pact, citing its ongoing support for a large number of Ukrainian refugees. Now, more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Poland's foreign minister endorses an EU defense bank to boost military funding. Thomas Rose is nominated as the new U.S. ambassador to Poland. Trump's U.S. aid cuts are sending shockwaves throughout Europe. EU commissioners gathered in the historic Baltic city of Gdańsk to outline priorities for Poland's EU Council presidency. Now, while discussions spanned multiple issues, the final press conference firmly focused on security and defense, a growing concern amid geopolitical tensions on the bloc's eastern border. Our correspondent Sasha Farbach has more.
Solidarity, that means something, not just here for this place in Gdańsk, it's also important for Poland and for the European Union. Now, those were heard by words of Prime Minister Donald Tusk as he welcomed the full European Commission here to Gdańsk for important talks about what the priorities are for the Polish rotating presidency. Now, security is one of the main things, that is the motto and theme, and this was again brought up during his speech here, standing next to Ursula von der Leyen, and he had some very tough words, what he believed he wanted to do, and words for migrants and what that means for the future for Poland and Europe. Let's take a listen.
We will not implement this pact that will increase the number of migrants in Poland. We are ready to cooperate with anyone to protect Europe against illegal migration. Poland is not ready to accept any additional burdens. Anyone who visits Poland, takes advantage of our hospitality and goes on to break the law in a violent way will be deported. These measures will be enacted in the coming days.
It's important to remember that Poland is now, at this point, you mentioned there's 2 million Ukrainian refugees already in the country. That was much more also in the years past. But then it continued, and we have to remember the context of this, that around the eastern flank of NATO, that eastern border of the European Union, that's not just Poland, that's NATO, and of course the European Union. Now, hybrid attacks have increased. This is something that Poland has been struggling with, but also answering the call, and this is important, not just Poland, it's the Baltic states as well, and Finland, and there was support as well from Ursula von der Leyen when she was here with him as well. Let's take a listen.
This is also a security challenge not only for Poland but for the whole of Europe, and this is why we stand in full solidarity with Poland, of course also with Finland, Lithuania and Latvia, and from day one on we have been working together, and we have been able to fence off these hybrid threats together.
The Prime Minister said that Poland is also a country that walks the talk, so very much going through with his policy, that this is something that he wants to continue. Security remains a priority. He said this matters for all citizens of the European Union, whether be it farmers or academics or researchers or workers. Everyone needs to be secure, and he wanted to hit that home, and that Western Europe is only safe if the external borders of Europe are also safeguarded. Now, that is the enduring message here of solidarity and security for Europe. Sasha Farbach for TVP World in Gdańsk.
Poland's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, has endorsed the creation of an EU rearmaments bank to finance defense projects. Now, as EU leaders agree on the need to increase military spending, countries are now debating on how to use EU funds to bolster defense. Marek Steele has the story.
An EU bank which would help bring defense projects to life. This could soon become a reality. Poland's foreign minister said the idea to create a rearmaments bank was worth considering. He argued that the new institution could be similar to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is used as a tool to build market economies.
Faced with the threat of war from Russia, the Union needs something similar, but on the scale of today's challenges, including the reconstruction of the defense industry and defense in Europe.
After the Trump administration took power in Washington last month, NATO and EU member states have been under even more pressure to boost their military expenses.
We will need funding both public and private funding. We will need more cooperation for better interoperability and lower costs, simpler legislation, for instance, on public procurement, and more innovation.
While putting forth the idea, Radosław Sikorski pointed out that strengthening Europe's defense capabilities is the continent's insurance card.
This is a welcome initiative from Sikorski, particularly because it can be opened to like-minded allies such as the United Kingdom and Japan. We have an urgent need to build up our defenses, and creative thinking like this is essential.
Such a rearmament bank would be beneficial not only because of its accessibility for non-EU states, it would also be immune to opposition from within the EU.
That's the genius part of this idea. It represents a coalition of the willing and not the entire EU where there would be a consensus principle. So indeed, that countries such as Hungary cannot veto anything.
But some experts indicate that the scheme could overlap with existing structures within NATO.
The first real question I have is, what is this EU Bank for Rearmament Defence Investment going to do differently to what the NATO programme that already exists actually does?
EU leaders gathered for an informal summit earlier this week to discuss the possible financing of defence projects by the bloc. But no concrete solutions have been presented so far. The European Commission estimates that EU defence financing needs roughly an extra €500 billion over the next decade to fill critical gaps in European defences. Poland, which currently holds the rotating EU presidency, has convinced Brussels to contribute to its border reinforcement project called East Shield.
Since our eastern border is the external border of the EU, I am very thankful for the confirmation that duties relating to protecting the border will be treated as a common duty. We have already found resources for that.
East Shield is an 800-kilometer-long line of fortifications along Poland's frontier with Russia and Belarus. It remains unclear to what extent the EU will support the more than €2 billion project, which is already under construction.
The EU is bracing for the possibility of US President Donald Trump following through on his threat to impose tariffs on the continent, and this TVP World can confirm. Now, while much of the details remain under wraps for now, it's known that Trump has already targeted Mexico, China, and Canada, with the European bloc potentially next in line, and Brussels is ready to respond. Our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, has the latest.
The EU has a plan in case US President Donald Trump slaps tariffs on the continent. A European Commission spokesperson told TVP World in a statement that a working group was set up prior to the 2024 US presidential elections. The aim of this group is to prepare for all of the potential outcomes following that democratic contest. They also sought the input of MEPs from European Parliament and member states, and while they would not reveal information of what is in that plan to us, they were keen to stress the importance of Washington to Brussels as an important trade partner, but they also said they were interested in protecting the needs of the 27 EU member states. Now, this comes off the back of US President Donald Trump on Sunday saying that it was an atrocity. He was referring to the growing trade deficit between the EU and the US. Poland's Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski told reporters recently in Brussels that these claims were misleading, and the EU, was a massive user of US products. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Donald Trump has tapped businessman Thomas Rose to serve as the new ambassador to Poland. Now, with his firm pro-Israeli views, Rose's prospective appointment highlights Trump's talent for blending business acumen with bold diplomatic endeavors. Sonia Gata-Biszczan has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced his choice for the new ambassador to Poland. Although the nomination is yet to be confirmed, Thomas Rose has already shared his initial reaction.
I am deeply honored and profoundly humbled to be asked by our history-making president to serve as ambassador to Poland. If confirmed, I will spend each and every day doing my very best to promote, defend, and advance the interests of the United States of America and our fabulous president.
In an interview with TVP World prior to his nomination, Rose reflected on the future of EU-US relations under the Trump administration.
So I think the U.S.-Polish relationship is going to be emphasized more than ever before.
Rose is a businessman and right-wing commentator who previously published the Jerusalem Post. He served as an advisor to former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence and has hosted a radio show.
I had a show on Sirius XM, the satellite radio company, for about 9 years before your favorite president was elected and my favorite vice president was elected.
And looking at Rose's ex-post announcing the nomination, it appears he continues to play favorites.
He did not mention Poland. He did not make any references trying to build bridges, which is what ambassadors usually do. What he said was basically playing into Donald Trump campaign agenda, America first.
But although Trump is said to appreciate loyalty, there may be additional motivation for this nomination.
Former U.S. ambassador, which was appointed by Donald Trump, Ms. Mosbacher, she was also a business person. So indeed, these nominations of President Donald Trump are more business-oriented.
In line with the current U.S. administration's rhetoric, Rose also criticized U.S. aid, calling it, quote, the largest Democrat money laundering operation in history.
He's going to promote American interests, and judging from what he has done so far in his life, a conservative agenda, a Zionist agenda, a strong support for Israel, a strong support for American business and conservative values.
In January, Rose criticized Poland's possible compliance with an International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu related to alleged crimes in Gaza, should he enter the country for the 80th anniversary of the Auschwitz liberation.
Donald Tusk, be careful, threatening to arrest Prime Minister of the Jewish state at Auschwitz, of all places, is not unnoticed by the USA. Poland deserves better.
At the request of Polish President Andrzej Duda, the Polish government adopted a resolution guaranteeing Netanyahu's uninterrupted participation during the potential visit to Poland. Although Netanyahu did not attend the ceremony, Rose praised Duda's initiative, reinforcing their bond from December when he called the Polish leader America's greatest friend in Europe. In a Friday press conference with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said his attitude toward the new U.S. ambassador will be characterized by friendliness, as he represents a country which Poland is allies with. Other Polish politicians also hope for amicable relations.
Anyone who becomes an ambassador should also be a diplomat, so I hope that he will put his personal views regarding numerous topics aside.
Mark Brzezinski, the former U.S. ambassador to Poland, nominated by President Joe Biden, stepped down in January prior to Trump's inauguration.
This weekend, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia will disconnect from the Russian energy grid in a significant EU-backed move to strengthen their energy security. Jan Kennedy has more.
This weekend, the three Baltic states are set to cut one of their few remaining links to Russia.
We'll no longer be dependent on the aggressor state and will have full control over our own energy system.
Still part of the Soviet-era Brel grid, along with Russia and Belarus, the Baltics will switch to the Continental Synchronous Area, with an aim to ensure a reliable frequency control needed for a stable and secure energy supply. But before the switch is concluded, they will have to operate independently for a brief period.
By 9 p.m., we will be disconnected from the Russian synchronous area and will operate as an island of the Baltic states. This island operation will last until Sunday afternoon, when the Baltic Sea electricity system will be connected to the Continental European Synchronous Area.
The long-awaited switch cost some 1.6 billion euros, 3/4 of which was covered by the EU. While it comes 10 months ahead of the planned deadline, Ukraine managed to achieve this feat 3 years ago. Experts say it's because of the scale of the project.
Main reason has been that our grid is built up in a way that is actually part of the former occupying state, Soviet Union. So to rebuild it from north to south, starting from Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, we have to do some investments, and investments take time.
While consumers are not expected to feel any impact either in power supply or prices, authorities are prepared for potential Russian interference.
Readiness is high. As I also said, we have addressed the National Armed Forces, the Home Guard, to make sure that they are also present so that there's no possibility of some kind of hybrid threat undermining this whole process of disconnection.
Nevertheless, the switch is more of a symbolic event because the Baltic countries ceased imports of Russian power back in 2022 due to major diversification efforts.
In another setback following the recent freezing of foreign aid distribution by the Trump administration, it's now becoming increasingly likely that the entire U.S. aid agency could be nearly shut down. Now, media reports say the U.S. president plans to keep fewer than 300 U.S. aid employees on duty, while over 10,000 will be put on leave. Now, the shutdown is sending shockwaves across hundreds of NGOs relying on American aid across the globe, including Poland. Kazimierz Wysiak reports.
In 2023, the United States spent close to $70 billion on international aid. USAID's budget amounts to $40 billion, with a large chunk of it going to hundreds of NGOs across the world. Until now, they heavily relied on American funding. After announcing a 90-day freeze on all foreign aid, the Donald Trump administration is about to go a step further, sending most of the 10,000 USAID employees on a forced leave.
The best, and I mean the best out of very bad options, is that USAID will be folded into the State Department with a much reduced budget and a much reduced staff.
The 47th US president argues the Agency for International Development has been riddled with cases of embezzlement, financial irregularities and misuse of public funds.
Tremendous amounts of really bad things, bad spending.
But critics of the freeze say the nuclear option could be disastrous for various social movements across the world. US aid has been providing humanitarian assistance ranging from crucial vaccine and food deliveries in third world countries.
It was not easy facing the staff going home, just like that on a day.
To support for human rights movement in Europe.
USAID has been one of the largest donors for Georgia and for Israel for many years, and of course stopping the operation of the USAID is very kind of painful for Georgia as well.
The South Caucasus country of Georgia has seen several irregularities during its parliamentary election, won by the pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party in late 2024. The International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy has been documenting cases of various electoral violations. Without US funding, the NGO's future hangs in the balance. Some experts warn that Russia could benefit greatly from this uncertainty.
You're going to see Russia go into Georgia, and it's going to say to Georgians, look, some of you were talking about closer relations with the West, including the US. Look at where that's got you. Has that worked out for you? Don't go to the US, come to us.
Several Polish NGOs have also been hurt by the sudden lack of US funding, including the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights and the oldest LGBTQ+ foundation, Lambda Warszawa. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky ordered a review of all humanitarian organizations affected by the freeze in order to extend a lifeline from the government in Kyiv until the international situation is clarified. Kazimierz Wysiak, TVP World.
Well, as we've just heard our reporters say it, President Donald Trump's sudden freeze of U.S. foreign aid is sending shockwaves throughout Eastern Europe, putting pressure on pro-democracy groups, independent media, and local governments already navigating the region's complex East-West tensions. Now, framed as part of his America First agenda, this 90-day freeze targets woke programs that Trump claims go against U.S. interests. But what is really at stake here? Now, to dive into this, I'm joined by Tomasz Pudowski, Associate Professor at the University of Economics and Human Sciences. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good evening.
This is really becoming quite a, I mean, we've heard it, right? Shockwaves. It's becoming quite a chaotic situation now. Trump's decision to suspend U.S. foreign aid, including the shutdown of the organization, really putting pressure on pro-democracy groups, independent media. What would you say is Trump's real reasoning behind this entire move?
Well, you could probably rationalize his decision in 2 or 3 different ways. Obviously, one is cutting funding, just spending less. I mean, this is his focus throughout the government, throughout whatever he's doing. He wants the U.S. to spend less money, and he wants everybody else to spend more. He thinks that the U.S. has been taken advantage of by everybody, and the U.S. has put in too much effort, too much money, too much resources to help the rest of the world, and he's against that. If you look at the history of U.S. foreign policy, you basically have seen during the last 2 or 3 decades, you have seen at least 3 different approaches to foreign policy, and he's the one. He's definitely not like Madeleine Albright or Bill Clinton or mainstream American foreign policy in the post-war period, which was about spreading democracy around the world. He's more focused on America. He's about isolationism, not the kind of isolationism that we saw 2 or 3 decades ago. It's impossible to go back to that kind of isolationism. But he's also not like Bush Jr. In which was in his administration, which was about spreading democracy to a certain extent, but mostly acting in American interest. So I think we see a different kind of foreign policy. I think it's destructive. I think it's unnecessary. I think USAID has been very active, has been very helpful. I remember it being a student in the 90s, USAID, I heard that term very often. A lot of conferences that were organized in Poland, freshly out of communism, were organized by.
Well, that's what I was going to tell you. I mean, all these countries that really depended on the state. I mean, billions of dollars are being invested into countries like Moldova, Serbia, Kosovo. All former communist countries, of course, with aspirations of joining the EU. I mean, how do you think that this is going to, the suspension of the state is going to affect the region in the long term?
Well, it's not going to help, obviously, and a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of opposition movements have been counting on this money, a lot of minority groups as well. So you see a lot of, you could explain this in a number of ways. Obviously, most of these organizations being supported are progressive. They support democracy, they support minority rights, they support free media, they act against tyranny, and so on and so forth. So Trump is against some of these, especially what he sees as radically left-wing, the so-called woke culture. But there was no woke culture in the 90s. Maybe woke culture is extreme, but I wouldn't say that it's mainstream in the world. Definitely not in Eastern Europe. Societies are not where American Democrats are, especially of the younger generation. So I think they've been doing much more good than bad. And he's also trying to say that he's doing this to counter money laundering. Maybe some money was misspent, as it always is in large organizations that have large budgets. Maybe some of the money should have been spent better, but I wouldn't say that this is a money laundering scheme. At least he didn't give any examples.
Okay, I mean, a number of Polish media outlets as well and NGOs are also going to be affected. What can you tell us about the impact that it's going to have on Poland?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they are not as. I think they are not. Obviously, they support minority groups in Poland, but mostly, I think Poland. The U.S. government has backed out of helping our region years ago. In this way, because they decided that we don't need it. So all this attention went to countries like Kazakhstan and further to the east. Obviously, some money is still spent here, and it was useful. So minority human rights organizations are going to suffer as a result of that. But I'm afraid there's nothing that we can do. I mean, according to U.S. Constitution, the president is just a single one-person executive power. So whatever he decides, he's going to do.
Professor, let me shift gears here. Now, President Trump has designated former publisher and CEO of the Jerusalem Post, Thomas Rose, for ambassador to Poland. Now, Rose took to platform X, and I just want you to take a moment to see what it is that he wrote.
I am deeply honored and profoundly humbled to be asked by our history-making president to serve as ambassador to Poland. If confirmed, I will spend each and every day doing my very best to promote, defend, and advance the interests of the United States of America and our fabulous president.
I'm happy for him, but not a word about Poland. I mean, usually the role of the ambassador is to build bridges, connect the two cultures. I mean, look for similarities. Mark Brzezinski, for example, was a perfect choice because he was connected to Poland through his father, who was a historic figure. Here, we don't see anyone, we don't see a person that is close to Poland. He did not mention Poland. Both mentioned Israel and the US. I mean,
precisely exactly what I was going to ask you. I mean, in November 2024, he said that Poland should be thrilled about Donald Trump becoming the new U.S. president. And I mean, just like you said, there's absolutely no mention of these Polish-American relations. But do you think that he is going to promote a conservative agenda? How is that going to, I mean, what is it going to entail, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I suspect that, well, usually when there's an important nomination, you see a lot of articles around the world, both in the US and around the world, about what it means and so on and so forth. Here, it's mostly Polish media, Times of India and Jerusalem Post, because he was the CEO of that newspaper when he lived in Israel. So I think it's not a big surprise for the rest of the world, and the world doesn't see it as an important nomination, as a significant one. I think that he's basically, that Trump was the choice, and it was the shock, and it was the shock in 2016. Now, some people
what can Poland expect from his
the ambassador is a consequence. What can we expect? We can expect him to support conservative agenda. We can
give us some examples. Like what can we be looking at?
Well, talking about the two genders, issues that that involves really small minorities, but those words are hurtful to them. But it's in a way it's not really the focus of Polish-American relations. So they are going to promote tradition. They are going to promote the so-called traditional values, fight what they see as the LGBT, for example. They are going to paint the opposition or the current government probably as liberal and left-wing, things like that. I think we can expect some of that, but this is not. I think polls have been, we've had that show, we've seen that in a couple of elections, and polls are not interested in that anymore. We're not going to be fighting over this anymore. I think we have more important issues, such as economic issues, for example, or the war in Ukraine, which is a real threat to our safety, prices, which is an important issue around the world. One of the ways to make or break elections. So I don't think that this is going to work. I don't think that people are going to get aggravated or.
I mean, he did speak out about Donald Tusk's government. I mean, what can you say about that, briefly?
Well, I think he's definitely much closer to our president than to the current government. He's rumored to have been behind our president's
President
Duda's vocal kind of calling on Donald Tusk not to imprison Prime Minister Netanyahu when he visits Poland.
Right.
And this was a plot, supposedly. I mean, this is the most common take, that this was a plot to get Donald Tusk in trouble, because he would have to choose between Israel and the US as Poland's important allies, and the EU law and international law. But that was blown out of proportion, and I think it didn't amount to much.
Belarus did call Polish president the best friend inside the European Union that America ever had.
Yes, I think both him. We're going to hear from him what we've heard from Donald Trump. So he's going to be allies with right-wing politicians.
Thank you so much, Tomasz Pudłowski. That's all the time we have for today.
Thank you.
All your insight. Thanks for being with us here. And that's all for this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.